The Baltimore Ravens made multiple controversial, yet actually genius moves over the weekend. We talk about them, including one that has a big impact on the future of Mark Andrews. All that and more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, and we're here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen every day. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms, including in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel, and in audio form where you can follow along and subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcast. We're a 5-day week plus more daily Ravens show. So we have weekday episodes every single weekday, Monday through Friday. We have some weekend bonus episodes as well as headlines take us there sometimes. And we also go live after every single Ravens game and after every single piece of Ravens big news as well. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers will get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Happy Monday, new week. Means more Ravens talk over here on Locked On Ravens. We had a bonus episode out over the weekend about Marlon Humphrey roasting Malik Harrison for signing with the Steelers. But even with that headline, there were still multiple other big and honestly some controversial headlines for the Baltimore Ravens when it comes to some of the moves that they made. So we'll talk about those for the first couple of segments because we have three of them to dive into. We'll talk about the whole Mark Andrews situation, the latest updates on that. And then we'll also dive into Ben Cleveland and Cooper Rush in the second part of the show. And then finally, as we do here on Locked On Ravens on Mondays, we'll get into a mock draft that I did over the weekend. And then we'll also get to some listener and watcher mock drafts as well. So let's start off with the Mark Andrews controversial and all these moves. Cleveland, Rush, Andrews all have genius components to them that we're going to dive into, but all of them were very controversial throughout the fan base. So Mark Andrews, the Ravens, and there was some different mix-ups about what the fifth day of the league year actually constituted here, but Baltimore goes up and picks up Mark Andrews' roster bonus. So that was actually triggered on the fifth day of the new league year. A lot of people anticipated that was Monday, but apparently, according to Jeff Rebeck, it was actually in between Saturday and Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So the Ravens decide to pick up that roster bonus. It triggers. So they now are on the hook for that. It's $4 million. Essentially what this means is that if the Ravens were to still move on from Mark Andrews, release or trade him, they would still be on the hook for that $4 million. So this was a big day for the Ravens, or at least a big date for them in terms of whether they'd want to keep him or not. It honestly signals to me that he's going to be on the roster. To me, it would be pretty foolish for them to take on the $4 million and then trade him later. That is still a possibility, but it, to me, is a very faint one. I feel like Mark Andrews now going to be on the team for this season. Now we'll see if a restructure happens or what this whole situation takes us for. I mean, look, there are still multiple outcomes. Like, it's not impossible the Ravens trade him, but I think it's very, very unlikely. The signals to me, Mark will be back for the 2025 season. We were kind of waiting on this, and a lot of people were hearing different things. We had Sam and Roquan who said that he was hearing the Ravens were shopping him, and, you know, Baltimore is exploring their options. According to multiple people there was an uptick in trade interest in Andrews after Evan Ingram signed. So I feel like it was a very fluid situation. One moment someone tells you something, another moment something else happens. Like, that's just the nature of the NFL offseason. But the Ravens ultimately decide, maybe if they were shopping him, that, hey, you know, the offers weren't good enough. Feels like Baltimore might have been looking for a day 2 pick and teams were offering day 3 picks. And the Ravens said, well, it's not worth giving up the player Mark is, even with the playoff struggles, for, you know, just a day 3 pick, where the Ravens will probably get a comp pick for him next year. But I think there's a genius component to this, where one, obviously Mark's still a great player. I get that $11 million is a pretty decent chunk of cap space when it comes to that. He's on the hook for about $17 million this season, just in terms of what he's getting paid, but $11 million of that is a cap hit. So freeing up that money could have given the Ravens other avenues to explore different things. And you do have Isaiah Likely in the folds to where he could take over that tight end role spot, and it would, you know, be a pretty seamless transition, but you do have a luxury of having Mark and Isaiah together. But I do think that, again, it comes down to next season. This is the last year of Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely together. I'd be floored if it wasn't, because you have to make a decision. That whole tight end room, everybody, even Charlie Kohler, they are all up for new contracts after this season. They have no tight ends on the roster after next year. Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, in my opinion, are both top 10 tight ends. Mark is a top 5 tight end. Isaiah Likely, he's certainly getting there, but for now, he's top 10. You can't re-sign both of those guys, especially with the contract extensions coming up for Kyle Hamilton, for Zay Flowers, Tyler Linderbaum, maybe Edafe Owe. That list goes on and on and on. But here's the thing that I think is an interesting part of it that not a lot of people are talking about. I've seen some of it here and there, but I want to really bring this point up. Depending on the snap situation next year for Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, because let's just go through the scenario that Mark Andrews was traded, or they do trade him, or whatever that will look like if it does happen, which again, very unlikely now it does. If Mark was traded, Isaiah steps into that tight end 1 role, and he's not signed to an extension by the time the season starts, there's a real possibility Isaiah goes off for like 1,000 yards and 8 to 10 touchdowns, and that contract he's getting, that's going to be a massive deal. That's going to be a massive, massive deal. Now, in this situation, let's say that Mark and Isaiah split time, right? Let's say the Mark's still tight end 1, Isaiah still tight end 2. Let's say it plays out that way. That could honestly drive Isaiah's price down a little bit because he's not going to have that big statistical season, at least not to the point where he is the guy. Because with Mark back in the fold, at least it appears that way for 2025, they're at least going to be splitting some level of snaps. I mean, you're paying the guy all that money, and Mark Andrews, you're going to play him, but you also can't keep Isaiah Likely off the field. You cannot do it. So that's the next part of this, where if Mark stays here, and that seems to be the case, what is the snap situation going to look like? Who is going to be tight end 1? I mean, to me, I feel like it still is going to be Mark Andrews, even though Isaiah Likely absolutely deserves more snaps, more playing time, and more opportunities. There's no question about that. But I feel like the contract that Isaiah is going to get with Mark back in the fold, whether it is with Baltimore or someone else, if he puts together a 650-yard and 5-touchdown campaign, that's really good. That's really good, because a lot of teams need tight end help, and they will pay. I don't think it impacts the contract too much, if being honest, because, again, with the need for tight ends across the league and Isaiah being as young and as good as he is at his position, Isaiah's going to get a bag regardless. I don't really care what the stats look like unless he has a very injury-plagued season, not a good season, and knock on wood, that does not happen. Hopefully Isaiah breaks out even more so than he already has. But I do think that we're going to see a statistical downturn for Isaiah if Mark stays. That's just natural. Playing time probably goes down for Isaiah too in some of these instances, which again can be good in some cases, maybe not so good in other cases, because I do believe Isaiah is ready for that jump. But having Mark in the fold, I think, is still a really good thing for the Ravens, because he does give you, look, even if Mark played only as a decoy this season, which I don't think is going to happen, obviously, right? Duh. But even if he played in that role, teams still know he's good, and teams still know that they have to put bodies on him. And that is part of the reason why guys like Isaiah Likely and Zay Flowers and Rashod Bateman and all these guys are freed up, because they have to worry. Defenses have to worry about Mark Andrews. And that's kind of what we saw at the beginning of the season, where teams were trying to take away Mark. And that somewhat was why he had a slow start to the season. Now, that doesn't mean that Isaiah, Zay, Rashod, those are still talented players that get open on their own accord and have the skill sets. It's not all just, Mark Andrews makes them. Of course, I'm not saying that whatsoever. But I think that with Mark back in the fold here, again, it appears that he's going to be a part of this team in 2025. You have to get your money's worth out of it, because, in my opinion, that $11 million could have been put towards an edge rusher, put towards a cornerback, whatever that would have been, a big swing. Now it's going to Mark Andrews, at least, we're assuming that's the case here with this roster bonus being triggered and the Ravens not making a move off of Mark. Now, if they do end up moving off of him, I mean, again, if you remember back last season, remember the Kevin Zeitler thing? It's a little different compared to what was going on here, but essentially Kevin Zeitler had void years on his deal. The Ravens could have avoided money being on their cap, at least dead money being on their cap for this past year, if they had reached an extension by a certain date. That deadline, it came and went, nothing happened, and so the Ravens were on the hook for that money. Now, that clearly signaled that Kevin Zeitler was not going to be a member of the team, but they still had the option to re-sign him. But the whole thing was, okay, why would you not reach an extension with him if you plan to bring him back and you have to incur that dead money anyway, because the money was going to be on the books regardless if Zeitler came back or not at that point. So it's the same thing with Mark Andrews here, where it's like, why would you pay the bonus if he's not going to be on the team? That's the thing here. So I've stayed true on this the whole time. I've been very clear. This is probably going to be the last year of Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely together because you cannot pay everybody. I still think Mark will have a good year this year. I still think Mark is a very talented player. It's unfortunate that he hasn't been able to be Mark Andrews in the playoffs, or at least be the player we know he can be in the playoffs. It's been a really big conversation point, obviously, and that reared its ugly head in Buffalo this past year. But again, I feel like the Ravens benefit more from having Mark on their team, and maybe there's a restructure that happens. I don't know. That still, to me, is the best outcome that can come out of this, is you still save some of that money and you do have a little bit more wiggle room there. Plus, you do get Andrews back on the team. But I don't know how realistic that is. At this point, it probably just feels like with the Humphrey Max restructure, some other extensions and restructures might be happening down the line here, coming days, weeks, months, who knows. Feels like Mark will be back on that number unless a restructure happens, and then this will kind of be his last hurrah in Baltimore, because, again, I think Baltimore would be foolish if they chose Mark Andrews over Isaiah Likely. I feel like you have to choose Isaiah in this situation next offseason, and both guys will get good deals. Feels like Mark will probably go to the Chargers or something next offseason, but for now, Mark Andrews, that roster bonus gets triggered, and looks like he'll be a member of the Ravens in 2025. Coming up in the second part of the show, we'll be talking a bit more about the Ravens' controversial, yet some genius in there as well, with the moves about Ben Cleveland and Cooper Rush. Stay tuned, plan to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is sponsored by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account? Wonder where'd all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. And the show is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly, no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. We're back for our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher here with you on this Monday edition of the show. Somewhat busy weekend for the Ravens, honestly. I mean, they went out there, made a handful of moves, big announcements. We talked about controversial yet genius nature of the Mark Andrews bonus getting triggered. They're picking that up because, hey, Mark will be back. But with that does come maybe is the Isaiah Likely contract a little less than anticipated next offseason if he doesn't get the stat line. So that's all to be determined. But Mark Andrews, that's a pretty big development in that whole situation, because there was a lot of different opinions about what could have happened to Mark. So we'll kind of have that entire situation continue to play out. But now we move on to the two other moves of the weekend for Baltimore. Let's start with the one that happened first in Ben Cleveland. I am shocked. I don't even know the word I want to use here. Shocked, floored, stunned, jaw dropped on the floor when I saw the notification. I don't know if that was anybody else, but it was certainly me. Ben Cleveland, he is back. The Ravens re-sign him, a one-year deal. I don't think anybody really anticipated this happening, if we're being honest. And look, everybody who didn't think it was going to happen, including myself, including probably a lot of people who were tuning in today, right? I think a lot of people who are watching, listening, definitely, maybe you thought this as well. It's like, well, okay, Ben Cleveland was not a John Harbaugh favorite. Ben Cleveland was in the John Harbaugh doghouse. Ben Cleveland got arrested this offseason, and he is still back with the team. Now, I think that this, to me, There's a lot of reasons for it, if we're being honest. I mean, I think the one that you look at is Baltimore. You lose Patrick McCary, and this is where I think the genius of it comes in. I don't know if Ben Cleveland ever gets out of that John Harbaugh doghouse. But first of all, the Ravens did need options on the offensive line. And from Ben Cleveland's side of things, and I saw multiple people make this point on social media, where was his fresh start going to be, especially after the arrest in the offseason? Didn't really put a ton out on tape. He's been solid when he's been put out there. The issue is, for some reason, John Harbaugh just doesn't put him out there. So that's the issue. But the genius part of it is I think that he can be the Ravens' new Patrick McCary. He is the guy that now has the most positional versatility on that line. If you remember, they were trying him out at center. He can play some tackle spots. Obviously, he can play at both guard positions. Ben Cleveland, and honestly, I think that if you put him at all 5 positions, he can play there. I think he's your new Pat McCary. Like, I think that's what it is now, where you lose a guy who can play all 5 positions and you get someone who can play at least 4, if not 5. Now, we know guys can move all around the offensive line. We know that they can maybe draft somebody and it could be the same thing, but Cleveland has experience in their system. And again, like, it hasn't been an issue of him playing extremely poorly when he's been on the field. But clearly, there have been conditioning issues, and John Harbaugh has talked about how, he has to work to get that job, and, he has confidence in the other guys. The whole dynamic is very weird, and that's why nobody expected him back, at least not a lot of people. If you were one of the people who had Ben Cleveland coming back to the Ravens, well, I'll give you a little round of applause. Congratulations, because I had no idea that this was going to happen. I'm still shocked by it. But again, when you look at it deeper, when you think about it a little more, it does make sense. Now, I don't know what the plan is for him. I don't know if he will get a real shot in some of these competitions that we see this offseason. Both guard spots feels like they're pretty set on Daniel Falele at right guard and maybe Andrew Voorhees at left. But again, if I were the Ravens, I would look to upgrade at both those spots. But we'll see. Ben Cleveland, factors in to both those competitions, and maybe he'll be the Ravens' backup center. They still have Nick Samek, who they drafted last year. Maybe he's a backup tackle. I don't know what the deal is with Ben Cleveland, but I can't believe I'm saying it. Still Ben Cleveland back with the Ravens on a 1-year deal. Now, let's dive into the other move that had some controversy. Again, the Ben Cleveland obviously had its own set of controversy just based off of how the Ravens and him, that whole dynamic between them happened. But the move that happened on Sunday, Cooper Rush, not Amari Cooper, not Cooper Kupp, this Cooper Rush, backup quarterback, at least Lamar's new backup, is signed with the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens get their backup for Lamar. It's a 2-year deal, $6.2 million, worth up to $12.2 million. And those incentives obviously are the big determining factor in how this all goes. Cooper Rush is not a bad backup quarterback by any means. I think the controversy in the move comes with the contract and paying out, it's not no money. It's not like a undrafted rookie minimum deal. Cooper Rush is getting a decent chunk of money here to be Lamar's backup. Now, Cooper Rush has had moments of having to step in for Dak Prescott over the last handful of seasons. He's 9-5 as a starter. He has 20 touchdowns and 10 interceptions over the course of his career. Right now, well, at least he's going to be 31 years old heading into the season. He'll turn 32 during the season. Cooper Rush is not Lamar Jackson. Cooper Rush, honestly, he doesn't have the skill set of Lamar Jackson. I know a lot of people thinking, skill set wise, scheme wise, Trey Lance from Dallas would have maybe made more sense there. Cooper, though, over the course of his career in terms of rushing, if you want to just get into that real quick, he doesn't really do a lot of it. 58 attempts for 24 yards. So not great. What is that? 0.4 yards per carry there. So not Lamar Jackson in that regard. But the genius part of this, and I think it's an interesting part of it too, is when you talk about, and guess what we're coming back to? We're coming back to comp picks. It all comes back to the comp picks. So with the prices that these guys get, obviously it can cancel out if you sign a guy for a certain amount of money. Cooper Rush was not cut. So depending on his average annual value and what other guys are getting on the market, you might have to sacrifice a comp pick if that number meets a certain threshold. So Nick Corte does a great job. He's the comp pick guy on social media. He's the guy that you go to for the comp pick analysis. He said, quote, the Ravens might know something about the precise APY Josh Jones got from the Seahawks that we don't know yet that would give them leeway to sign Cooper Rush to a compensatory free agent caliber contract. And then the news comes out that, okay, Cooper Rush is 3.1 average annual value. Nick says 3.1 APY should be right at that perfect place where Cooper Rush won't qualify as a compensatory free agent unless he has to play for most of the season. And also another thing Nick says is to watch these Cooper Rush incentives is if they're all not likely to be earned. Any that are likely to be earned will count the compensatory APY, which not likely to be earned, it does not. Most incentives end up being not likely to be earned. So that obviously comes down to playing time, starts, wins. That's what Jeff Rebeck ended up reporting on the contract. So I don't know if the specifics of the deal came out in terms of what those incentives actually are, like what amount of snaps, how many wins, how many starts or whatnot. But it feels like the Ravens are not going to be charged in the comp pick formula for the Cooper Rush signing, which essentially is just probably right under that threshold, which gives them a competent backup quarterback that isn't going to cost them a free draft pick, essentially, when it comes down to it. Now, the big controversy with the backup quarterback and the whole money thing is, don't spend on that position, this, that, and the other. And, why have a backup quarterback, a good one, when, if Lamar goes down, the season's over. Yes, if Lamar Jackson goes down for the season, season's over. But if you've been listening to me on Locked On Ravens, this has been my thing with the backup quarterback position. If Lamar goes down for the season, you're done. We've established that. But what if Lamar has to miss, let's say he gets injured in October, and again, hopefully, knock on wood, there it is, none of this happens. But let's just say hypothetically Lamar goes down in October and has to miss 8 games, and he comes back mid-December, right? Miss 8 games, comes back mid-December. If you have an undrafted rookie, unproven guy, like let's say Devin Leary goes in there, what if Devin Leary goes 1-7? And the Ravens, who are fighting for playoff position, when Lamar got injured, all of a sudden they're out of the playoff race, right? The backup quarterback, the job if the starter goes down is to keep the team afloat. Be a game manager if that's what it comes down to. I know that word's gotten a bad rep, or that phrase has gotten a bad rep over the years, but still, just be a game manager. Where if Cooper Rush can go 5-3 is the Ravens starter while Lamar is out, or 6-2, or maybe even 4-4. That is enough to at least keep the Ravens afloat. So when Lamar comes back in December, he can hopefully rattle off some wins late in the season and get the Ravens to that playoff positioning, or at least into the dance, fighting for seeding, whatever it may be. So I think there is value in having a good backup quarterback. Now, the best case scenario is that Cooper Rush never plays, or he only plays when the Ravens are blowing out teams, right? Obviously, the hope is Lamar doesn't go down. You don't need Cooper Rush in any way, shape, or form. But in the event that Lamar does get injured, and again, it's a possibility with every NFL player. Every NFL player can get hurt. We've seen Lamar go down with injuries over the course of his career. If that happens and Lamar has to miss a month or 2 months, having a guy that can keep your team afloat is valuable. And now with the news that, hey, this probably or might not come in at the comp pick level that won't cost the Ravens in that category, I think it looks like a genius move there from Eric DeCosta. Cooper Rush is not going to save the franchise, right? Cooper Rush is not going to be a guy that comes in and wins you a Super Bowl. In fact, I think anybody who, thinks about this Ravens team, it starts and ends with Lamar. So if Lamar goes down, it's over. But if Lamar goes down for just a little bit of time and he can come back, having a good backup quarterback is, I think, really good. So big offseason for the Ravens so far. Big weekend this past weekend. And, of course, the offseason does not end after the first week of free agency. Coming up, we'll be talking about another mock draft Sunday I did for this episode of Locked On Ravens here on Monday. Plus, we'll get to a couple of listener and watcher mock drafts as well. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty coming your way on Locked On Ravens.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Back with you here on Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher wrapping up this Monday edition episode of the show. Thank you for tuning in today. And be sure, if you want some more daily Ravens coverage, hit that like and subscribe button in video form and follow along in audio form for 5 days a week of daily Ravens coverage. We do it every single weekday. So we are here for you daily, diving into every single piece of Ravens news. And we also have a lot coming our way this offseason as well. If you're an everydayer, first-time listener, somewhere in the middle, thank you so much for all of your support. And tell a friend, tell a family member as well, because we are here for them and we are here for you on Locked On Ravens. Now, as Monday tradition, although I couldn't do one last week because it just got so crazy with free agency, mock draft Mondays. You know what we do here on Locked On Ravens. So I'll do mine that I did yesterday. I try to get some prospects in every week that are different. We can talk about them, and then we'll go with a couple of listener and watcher mock drafts. So let's just pull it up here and dive into it. First round, I took Jihad Campbell, the linebacker from Alabama. Now, I know a lot of people see that linebacker tag and say, not an inside linebacker. Kevin, what are you doing? Look, let me explain here. Jihad Campbell is not just an inside line. He's not just an off-ball guy. Obviously, he's a hybrid guy. He can play on the edge as well. And he's someone that I think in a defense like the Ravens and Zach Orr's defense, I think Zach Orr would have so much fun with Jihad Campbell. And again, the versatility piece of there endless. You can put him as an edge rusher. Like, you can put him there. If you want to put, if that's your big need, which obviously it is for Baltimore, you don't get anybody. I think you can work Jihad Campbell into that role. He just has the flexibility and versatility that we have seen, even with a guy like Malik Harrison, who the Ravens did have playing inside linebacker and Sam. They had him doing both. They like to have these versatile pieces, these versatile players, and I think Jihad Campbell, with his athleticism, his playmaking ability, I think that he would be a really good piece for Baltimore's defense, but he's not just an inside linebacker. I think, again, people see the linebacker tag and they get all freaked out. I don't think the Ravens should take a pure off-ball linebacker in the first round. Like, no. But I think that guys like Javon Walker, Jihad Campbell, those guys have that versatility, which I think Baltimore would really, really like. Now, in the second round, I took Marcus Mbow, the Purdue offensive lineman. He's a tackle, but I think a lot of people see him maybe at center, maybe at guard. He had a great week at the Senior Bowl and Combine as well. So I think that he's a player that, with his versatility, again, Baltimore loves those versatile pieces on the offensive line. Plus, I just think the potential is through the roof. I think he'd be a really solid option there because Baltimore, I think, even with Ronnie Stanley, still has to address that position. Kyle Kennard, South Carolina edge, I think he'd be a steal, honestly. I see him going anywhere. Second, third round, like a day 2 guy. I think that he'd be a really solid option for Baltimore as well. Now, CJ West is interesting because, look, we know this is a really, really deep defensive line class. So there are a lot of players you could put here. Jordan Phillips from Maryland is an option. Darius Alexander from Toledo. There are so many, like, late day 2, early day 3 prospects at that defensive line class. Plus, I mean, it's all throughout the draft. But I feel like if Baltimore doesn't want to spend a first-round pick on like a Kenneth Grant or something, and he's probably not even going to be there, but I think that you can still get value in this draft. So guys that are going early day 3 might go mid day 2 in last year's draft. I think that's how strong this defensive line class is. CJ West is at a really good pre-draft process as well. Jacob Parrish, 136, corner out of Kansas State, I think will be a really solid option in the secondary. Nias Peebles, the Virginia Tech defensive lineman, at 176. Keaton Crawford, the Nevada safety, at 183. Luke Lachey, Iowa tight end, at 203. I know we just talked about Mark Andrews in that first segment, but I think that even so, maybe the Ravens take Lachey and they can sneak him on the practice squad. I don't think keeping 4 tight ends is realistic, but maybe they like enough of Lachey to take him because, again, that entire tight end room is not on the books next year. They're all free agents, so we'll see what that looks like there, but I think Lachey, a really solid option there. Willie Lampkin, the North Carolina offensive lineman, I think he'll go a lot earlier than this if we're being honest. But again, when the mock draft simulator gives you guys, you just got to take them. Dante Thornton, the Tennessee wide receiver, at 212. Speedier guy, certainly could add some more speed to that Baltimore offense. We know Eric DeCosta in the Ravens, they want to build a track team out there that has been on record. So I think he would fit in there nicely. Then Caleb Ransall, the Tulane corner, at 243. So definitely for me, more of a trench-heavy mock draft. I'll just pull it up one more time so people can see it here in video form. And if you're in audio form, I'll just read it one more time. Jihad Campbell, Marcus Bowe, Kyle Kennard, TJ West, Jacob Parrish, Nias Peebles, Keaton Crawford, Luke Lachey, Willie Lampkin, Dante Thornton, and Caleb Ransall. So I like this one overall. Again, I think people want to see more secondary help because the Ravens have not addressed that this offseason yet. But I think even so, the trench is still a really important part of this offseason for Baltimore as well. Let's do a couple of listener/watcher mock drafts. Again, if you don't know how this works, I put my mock drafts out on social media on Sunday. If you want to comment down below, I try to get to as many of them as I can here. We'll get to a couple of them here now. Let's start off with Be More Finest, who takes Josh Simmons, offensive tackle from Ohio State at 27, Deion Walker, defensive lineman from Kentucky at 59, Jack Sawyer, edge from Ohio State at 91, Quincy Riley, corner from Louisville at 129, Sebastian Castro, safety from Iowa at 136, Connor Colby, offensive guard from Iowa at 176, Dante Thornton, wide receiver from Tennessee at 183, BJ Adams, corner from UCF at 203, Devin Neal, Kansas running back at 210, Luke Lachey, tight end from Iowa at 212, and Ben Sauls, kicker from Pittsburgh at 243. Josh Simmons will be awesome, especially because we know Ronnie's not a long-term solution at tackle. Simmons is coming back from the injury at Ohio State, but even still, I think he's a really talented prospect. I do think Ronnie coming back lessens the need for a pure offensive tackle, but it doesn't eliminate it completely. I can see the Ravens maybe trying to kick some of these guys into guard like we talked about with Marcus and Bo, so we'll see. Deion Walker, I love as a defensive line prospect, and Jack Sawyer feels like it's the Ravens flock crush, if we're being honest. Like, Ravens fans love Jack Sawyer, and I honestly do too. I think that a high motor guy can help out there. Plus, I see the kicker pick in the last. I need to start taking kickers in these drafts. I keep forgetting, but kicker is a real option. I think Baltimore does take one in this draft when it's all said and done. Let's just do a 3-round one here from Braden Howard, who has the Ravens taking Walter Nolan at pick 27, Jack Sawyer from Ohio State at 59, and Wyatt Milum, the tackle from West Virginia, at 91. I like this draft a lot. I think Walter Nolan is one of the more dominant defensive linemen in this class. You know, some people have higher grades than 27. Some people are a lot lower on him, but you know, after the Michigan guys, it's a toss-up, but there are so many talented players. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I still like Walter Nolan a lot. Jack Sawyer, we talked about, high motor guy. I love that pick in the second or the third round, honestly. And then a tackle for the road here, an offensive lineman who I think, again, there are so many options that you can put these guys at these days, where I think if the Ravens came away with this haul, I'd like it. I think, though, they're doing this, next pick should probably be a defensive back, whether it be safety or corner. But you know what? Early day 3, there'll probably be some guys available. That's all I have here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. On the way out, hit the like and subscribe button in video form and audio form for 5 days a week, plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Pumped about how this offseason has gone and really excited to keep it going on the show. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens content, breaking down the latest Ravens news and notes. So be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.